13. We are in a series on Matthew 13. If this is your first week with us, I'm really glad that you're here. I want to encourage you to fill out your Connect card, a welcome card, and stop by the welcome desk out in the foyer. We have a gift that we'd like to give to you, help you get connected to the ministries here at Rolla First. And if this is your first week with us, we've been in this series on Matthew 13 now for basically the whole year. We're looking at the parables of Jesus in Matthew 13 and what he's teaching his disciples through the use of these parables. And we've made it through some really interesting parables to this point. We are going to actually cover two parables in 1 week today because they're super short. And the passage we're in is Matthew 13, verses 31 through 35. Matthew 13, verses 31 through 35. And it's only 5 verses, but there's 2 parables and a prophecy included in these 5 short verses. And so we're going to examine these together and look at how the kingdom of God operates in this world. Now, maybe you've had some similar experiences like some experiences that I've had, but I know that I've seen in my life some things that I have thought were very small or insignificant turned out to be things that created a huge impact in my life. Have you ever had that experience in life where something seemed to be small, seemed to be insignificant, but it turned out to be a really big deal? You ever had that in your life? I think back to this story that I like. I read about this once, and it's just super interesting to me. This guy in Australia in the 1800s received a gift. It's 1859. Australian man named Thomas Austin received a gift of 24 rabbits. Maybe you guys have heard this before. He liked the rabbits. He wanted to hunt them, is why somebody sent them to him from Great Britain. Got the rabbits, released them onto his property. He was going to have fun hunting one day. Seemed like a small thing. He's just going to go rabbit hunting. Well, it turns out that rabbits populate rather quickly. I don't know if you knew that about them. And within a few short years, by 1920, so really within 60 years, there was an estimated 400 million rabbits in Australia. From those 24 that one man released on his private property in Australia. Rabbits aren't native to Australia. They have no predators. There's nothing there to eliminate them except for hunters. And they've caused untold damage and destruction on the ecosystem on the continent, and authorities are still trying to evacuate rabbits from the continent. There's still over 200 million rabbits, they estimate, right now on the continent. All from one guy in 1859 who got 24 rabbits that he could go hunt. Seemed like it was no big deal, but it has huge repercussions on an entire continent of people. There's things that happen in our lives all the time. You have a short comment to somebody that completely destroys a relationship. You didn't think anything of it in the moment, but it damages your relationship. You make an innocuous choice that ends up having huge ramifications in your life for years and years and years to come. There's all sorts of examples. Now, Jesus here gives us some positive examples because it's not just negative. Oftentimes we see little things that turn out to be big deals later on, and it has very negative consequences, but there's also small things that can turn out to be very good. And Jesus gives us 2 parables here and how very small things to us can turn out to have huge impact on our lives and on the world in a very positive way. And Jesus is talking about the kingdom of heaven. And we're going to see 2 parables up front, like I said, and then there's a prophecy at the end. And let me read through the passage with you in verse 31. We're going to get all the way down through 35 here. Here's the first parable. It says, he put another parable before them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like a grain of mustard seed. Now, if you don't know, mustard seeds are super small. I actually have one. I was going to bring it out, but I couldn't find it. So it's so small I lost it. But I have one and somewhere in my desk at home, and they're tiny little specks. So this kingdom of heaven is like a grain of mustard seed that a man took and sowed in his field. It's the smallest of all seeds, but when it has grown, it is larger than all the garden plants and becomes a tree so that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches. And he told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like leaven that a woman took and hid in 3 measures of flour till it's all leavened. And then you get to verse 34, it says, all these things Jesus said to the crowds in parables. Indeed, he said nothing to them without a parable. This was to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet. I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter what has been hidden since the foundation of the world. Now, I want to circle back around and look at that first parable with you. It's a parable of the mustard seed. How many of you have heard the parable of the mustard seed before? Lots of us. It's a very popular parable, partly because it's so short. It's concise. It's easy to understand. Jesus is saying the kingdom of heaven is like a small seed that grows into a big tree. And as we look at this parable, Jesus gives us this grand scale view of the kingdom of heaven. This is the kingdom of heaven on earth, how it operates in all of humanity. You can see that it starts small, but it ends up growing to be so big, having such a big impact that Jesus says in the parable that even the birds of the air rest in its branches. The kingdom of heaven becomes so significant that it impacts everything else around it. The kingdom of heaven, here's what I want to point out to you this morning. The kingdom of heaven starts small, but it makes an unbelievable impact. The kingdom of heaven starts small, but has an unbelievable impact. It's unbelievable. And we have talked about this in the past few weeks. But what's happening here, and what Jesus is really getting at, is he's talking about how the kingdom of heaven operates in this world. And you'll remember from a couple weeks ago that the kingdom of heaven was ushered in by Jesus. And Jesus is going through all these parables because he is the kingdom of heaven. And he's telling his disciples, the kingdom of heaven is here. It's in me. I am bringing the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of God is right now. It's in me. Because Jesus is God in the flesh. And as Jesus resided here on earth, as he became flesh and dwelt among us, the kingdom of heaven literally came down to earth. It's here. It's now. The presence of God is on earth. It's in Jesus. So Jesus ushers in the kingdom of heaven. Now that might seem small. It's one man. In this parable, what Jesus is getting at is, he's saying, you guys might not recognize it right now. It may seem small for me to say that I am the kingdom of heaven. But the kingdom of heaven is like a small seed that grows into a large tree. It starts small in Jesus. Jesus ushers in the kingdom of heaven. But then what happens is it starts to grow. Jesus brings his disciples in. He fills them with the Holy Spirit. The presence of God is now not contained to just Jesus. It's now being poured into his disciples. He's bringing them into the kingdom. And then what happens is the disciples begin to share the kingdom. They receive the presence of God in their own hearts, in their own lives. They're transformed. They're made new. And then the disciples carry the presence of God and begin to reach their friends and their family. And then Jesus sends the disciples into other towns to go and make more disciples. And they go from town to town to town, and the kingdom of God is spreading. It's spreading and spreading as the disciples share the good news of Jesus Christ. Jesus ushered in the kingdom, the disciples shared in the kingdom, and the church is still continuing to establish God's kingdom. We are a part of this every bit as much as the disciples were 2,000 years ago. Jesus brought it in, the disciples shared in it, and you and I, as a part of God's church, are establishing the kingdom of heaven still to this day. It continues to grow and grow and grow. And I have, I have some really, really good news for you guys. What started as one man now has impacted the lives currently today of over 2 billion people who say they are followers of Jesus Christ. There are alive today 2 billion people across this globe who are followers of Jesus and are a part of his church. God's church continues to grow and move and spread and share the presence of God with people who have never heard his name before. God's church, the Church of Jesus Christ, continues to grow stronger and stronger each and every day. Sometimes I think we can fall into a defeatist type attitude. And I don't know if it's just us in America or if people experience this all over the globe, but I think sometimes we can feel like we've been victims or like the church is weakening or, it's like, what's happened in this world? Let me tell you guys something. The church is stronger today than it has ever been before in history. The church is doing more today than it has ever done ever before in history. We, as God's church, are represented on every continent. There are churches in Antarctica. The church is everywhere. His disciples are everywhere. Jesus has brought his disciples in this parable here, or what's happening right here in this passage. Jesus brings his disciples close to him. He shares his presence with them. They, in turn, spread the kingdom across the continent, and within a few hundred years, it has spread across the globe. Now, 2,000 years later, it continues to grow stronger and stronger. There are, like I said, 2 billion people who know Jesus and who are full of his Spirit. The church is represented in every continent, on every continent, in almost every country, and is making an impact around this world. I got onto ChatGPT this morning just to make sure. I was like, hey, help me out here. Are there any churches in Antarctica? They're like, yeah, there are several. And they gave me a listing of their service times and everything. I was like, hey, look at that. I mean, you could go to church in Antarctica. The church is helping. Here's what really excites me. And I don't know if you guys are excited enough about this today because you're a part of this. But this is what excites me. The church is helping more people out of hunger and poverty. It has given more hope to people lost in despair and has transformed more lives than any other organization or governmental agency that has ever been formed, and it's not even close. There is no close second to the impact that the Church of Jesus Christ is having in this world. If you include hospitals, schools, and food programs and disaster relief, estimates suggest that Christian philanthropic activity exceeds $5 billion per year. That's the Church of Jesus Christ. That's the kingdom of heaven making an impact in this world. That's real lives that are changed and transformed. Jesus today is making a bigger impact in the world than he has ever in history. More people are being reached right now by Jesus Christ than we've ever seen in all of history. As we speak, 1/3 of the population of Korea is now Christian. Korea has historically not been favorable to Christians. And despite the horrific persecution of communist China, there are more than 100 million Christians in China. And it's the fastest growing church in the world. They are not kind to Christians at all. There are places in the Middle East and Africa and Latin America that are experiencing massive explosion of growth in Christianity. The Assemblies of God alone, just the Assemblies of God, there are over 25 million believers in South America. There are over 20 million believers in Africa, just in the Assemblies of God. And we're just one little branch of the church. Jesus is doing unbelievable things in this world. What does he mean that the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed that grows into a large tree? He means that what started with him has now grown to become so large, has now grown to have such an impact on the world around it that it affects every life. I believe that Jesus' church now is affecting, in one way or another, every life on earth. Through charity outreach, through hospitals, through schools that we've started, through foster care, through adoption. My friends, you are a part of having an impact around this globe. That ought to fire you up. That ought to get you excited. I think about, Jesus talks about this large tree that even the birds come and they nest in its branches. I think about that in the scheme of the kingdom of heaven. And just the beautiful language that Jesus uses here, and I think about how what started with Jesus has now grown to such a point that the impact is felt by people far and wide. That we are caring for and helping people who never would have been affected before. The church is reaching lives. It's changing lives. It has an unbelievable impact. And we are just one small piece of that. I want us to continue to increase our impact here in Rolla. I'm always looking for more ways that we can have a greater impact here. I believe that all of us should be looking for ways to have a greater impact. But can I encourage you this morning that we are having an unbelievable impact in this world, and you are included in that. You are a part of that. It starts small, but it is now reaching the point that it is spreading across the globe in undeniable, unbelievable ways. I want to look at the next parable with you, because what we see in the first parable is a grand scheme of things. Now, you guys didn't get as fired up about that church stuff as I thought you would, so I'm going to need a little more excitement here. I'm telling you, $5 billion of commitment a year, that fires me up. I don't know. But the next parable is just one verse. And what Jesus is doing here is he's working from out to in. He's just shown this grand scale impact that the kingdom of heaven has had, and now he's going to give us a parable that helps us understand on a more personal scale what the kingdom of heaven does and how it affects us in our lives. So look at this parable. Verse 33 says, he told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like leaven that a woman took and hid in 3 measures of flour till it was all leavened. Now, this might be a little bit more of a confusing parable for you to understand. His audience would have understood this really quickly because this is how they all would have made bread in their own homes. But what would happen on a daily basis, the cook in the family would go to prepare a batch of bread for the family's consumption that day. And they would have a little piece of dough left over from the day before. That dough would have yeast in it. It would be leavened already. They'd take a little piece that would be left over, and they'd bring it into their new batch of dough, and they'd mix it all in. And that little piece of dough left over from the day before would then, it's the yeast and the leaven in it, the leaven is yeast, would then be worked into this whole new batch of bread, of dough, and it would end up affecting the whole batch, causing the entire batch to now be leavened. And then they'd save back a little piece for the next day, and they'd mix that in, and it'd go day after day after day. And Jesus is saying just a little piece of leftover dough with leaven in it is enough to affect a whole new batch. In fact, he uses a specific example of an amount. He says 3 measures. Now, for you and me to understand fully what he's saying, 3 measures is equivalent to 50 pounds of flour. That would make a lot of dough. And Jesus is saying the kingdom of heaven is like a little piece of leaven that's mixed into 50 pounds of flour and dough made from that, and it's enough to leaven that entire batch. Now, 50 pounds of flour back then, I only know this because I read about it, would feed about 100 to 150 people. And so Jesus is saying just a little bit of leaven is enough to affect enough dough that it would feed 100 to 150 people. That's a lot of families, isn't it? I'm glad I don't have to cook for 100 to 150 people every single day. But just that little piece, after it gets worked in, it goes throughout the whole batch of dough. And what I think we really need to keep at the forefront of our attention here, what Jesus is really driving home, is that little bit of the kingdom, when it's brought into our lives, it affects every aspect of our lives. A little piece of leaven affects the whole batch of dough. And my friends, a little bit of the kingdom of heaven in your heart affects your entire person. What you see here is that the kingdom, it may seem insignificant, but it creates unstoppable influence, unstoppable impact on your life. You bring in the kingdom of heaven. You say, Jesus, I want you in my heart. I want you in my life. And what you may think is a small prayer, a small commitment. Yeah, Jesus, I want to follow you. Maybe you don't understand all the different ways that will affect your life, but what happens is you pray a small prayer, Jesus comes into your life, and he begins to permeate every aspect of your heart, every aspect of your life. Jesus and your faith in Jesus will affect every part of you. It will affect every part of your life. There's no real way to have Jesus in one part of your life and not another. If you have Jesus, if you're following Christ, there's no real way to stop him from affecting every part of your heart, every part of your life. You can't build walls around Jesus and say, hey, you can have my career, but you can't have my habits. You can have this relationship, but you can't have this thing that I've got on the side. You can have this day, but you can't have the rest of these days. There's no way to wall Jesus off in your life and say, you can have this, but not have this. Jesus is saying the kingdom of heaven, once it's worked in, it's going to affect everything. It's going to affect your heart. It will begin to affect your desires. It will begin to affect your thoughts. It will begin to affect your goals. It will begin to change your future. It will change the course of your life. When you bring Jesus into your heart, he begins to rearrange everything. He's permeating every aspect of your life. And he wants it all. He wants all of you. He doesn't want just a little piece. He wants all of your heart, all of your attention, all of your life. And when you bring Jesus in, he gets to work. And just like a little piece of leaven can cause an entire batch of dough to be leavened, so too does the Spirit of Jesus come into your life and begin to affect every different aspect of you. And the longer you follow Jesus, the more you will see him working on your life. It's not a one-time thing. It's a daily thing. It will affect every part of your life. And my friends, your faith, again, this is a personal scale here. Your faith will affect every person in your life. It affects every part of your life, and it affects every person in your life. When you bring the kingdom into your own heart, when you bring Jesus in, you say, Lord, I want you to forgive me. I want you to set me free from this bondage that I've experienced in my life. I want a new life. I want to follow you, Jesus. When you commit yourself to him and he fills you with the power of the Holy Spirit and you have the living God living within you, that begins to spread into the lives of the people around you. It's not contained to just you. You can take a believer and put them in any setting, plop them into any different situation, and that person, if they are a follower of Jesus, they are going to begin to have an effect on the people around them. They will affect their friends, they will affect their coworkers, they will affect their family. You will have an effect on the people around you. Your faith will begin to cause the people around you to be touched by the kingdom of heaven. And they have an opportunity to commit their lives to Jesus. And just as a little piece of leavened dough, when mixed into a whole batch, causes a whole batch to be leavened, so too does your faith affect all of your friends and all of your family, all of your coworkers. You are that little piece of leaven. You are. And you can get mixed into any setting, and my friends, your faith will have an effect on the people around you. I think back to the day that I got saved. I remember the day. I was 4 years old. I came home from Sunday school. My teacher gave me the little cutout of a donkey because I always liked that. You know those flannel graphs that you would put the animals on and the little Jesus. And I always got the animals because animals are my thing. So I told you a story about rabbits. And, it's like I always would go home with the little felt animals, and I had my little donkey. And I was remembering that the Sunday school teacher told us that if you want to go to heaven, you got to pray to Jesus. And I found my mom after Sunday lunch. She's coming up the steps with her laundry basket. And I stopped her halfway up. I went down the steps. I said, "Hey, Mom, will you pray with me to receive Jesus?" I don't remember exactly how I said it. "Will you pray the sinner's prayer with me?" Something to that effect. And I remember my mom, so patient, just set her laundry basket down. And she sat down on the step and had me sit down next to her. And she put her arm around me. She prayed with me. I was like, "Okay, great." And I went back to playing with my donkey. That was awesome. I remember that day. And I never would have guessed the impact that day praying that little prayer as a little 4-year-old would have on my kids now, 30-something years later. That little prayer that I prayed now has an effect on my wife on a daily basis. My faith that was established as a 4-year-old on those steps by my mom's laundry now affects my wife and my kids. It affects all of you. My faith affects you. Your faith affects me. The prayer I prayed, that little prayer when I was 4 years old, affects the people I interact with on a daily basis in the community. Little things that seem so small can have such enormous consequences and have such huge impacts on our lives. We don't even think about it in the moment, do we? But your faith is the leaven that can cause an entire batch to rise. Think about that next time you go to work. Think about that next time you go to a Thanksgiving and you're surrounded by a bunch of family from out of town that doesn't love Jesus and they think you're weird. Think about that. That your faith can have that impact. I want to talk to you about one more thing before we're done today. Look at the last verse. Verses 34 and 35, rather, last two verses. It says, "All these things Jesus said to the crowds in parables. Indeed, he said nothing to them without a parable. And this was to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet. I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter what has been hidden since the foundation of the world." And as I was looking at this verse over this past week, like, man, how does that affect us? This is Jesus teaching in parables. And as I was thinking about what Jesus was doing and really what he's teaching about how the effect that the kingdom of heaven has in this world. And he's working his way from grand scale to personal scale. He's moving outside to in. As we look at these last two verses, and we've seen how the kingdom of heaven affects the world, what these last two verses help us to understand is how the kingdom of heaven affects this world. How does it spread the way that it does? How does it affect our own hearts and permeate our own lives? How does it go from us to the people around us? It's just by what Jesus is doing right here. He's spreading the gospel. He's teaching the truth. He's communicating to the people around him the truth of the gospel, the truth of the kingdom of heaven. And my friends, as people are listening to these parables, we know from past weeks that the people who were listening to him thought he was talking crazy. They thought he was a fool. They didn't understand everything he was saying. And if you're anything like me, you've had conversations with people in your own life about your relationship with Jesus, and there's probably some people who have thought that you were a fool for following the Lord. And what we see here, the reminder that these two verses are for us, is that the kingdom of heaven may sound foolish, but it is revealing undeniable truth. And what is Jesus doing here? He is revealing the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ. He's using parables, he's teaching the people around him, and that is a reminder for us how the kingdom affects this world. How does it spread across the world? It's through us teaching truth to the people around us, sharing truth with them, sharing the gospel message. And even if it sounds foolish to them, even if they think we are a fool, my friend, our task is to be like Jesus here and to teach, to share. The people in your lives who don't know the truth need someone to tell them. The people in your life who don't know Jesus need someone to tell them about him. And that person is you. Our role is to teach the truth of the gospel. No matter what people think about you, no matter what they're mumbling under their breath when they walk away, no matter how it may change your reputation at work, no matter what friends it may cause to spend less time with you, no matter the consequences, our role is to teach the truth of the gospel. Because the people who don't know it need to hear it, and they need someone to tell them about it. And that's us. And people may think that you're a fool. So let me challenge you. Show them you're not. The people in your life may think you're a fool when you talk to them about Jesus. So show them with your life that you're not. Show them with how you live that the gospel is true. Show them in how you treat the people in your family, in your workplace, your friends. Show them that the gospel is true. Show them that Jesus has changed you. Show them that Jesus' love is in your heart. Show them. People need to hear, but they also need to be shown. They need both. I remember as a little kid, Josh, you want to help me out here? Thank you. I remember as a little kid, my dad had me start working with him at the car dealership he worked at. And my job was I would get dropped off from school around 4:30 or so, and I'd hang out for my dad to finish his shift. And then on Tuesdays and Thursdays, my dad and I would work on cleaning up the mechanic bays. We'd be sweeping up all the mess, picking up all the loose parts. We'd be scrubbing up all the oil, and we'd spend hours. We'd spend a couple hours there every Tuesday, every Thursday, cleaning up the shop floors. My dad had already put in a 12-hour day. As an adult, I look back at this, and now I realize, my dad worked 12 hours that day. Now he's working another 2.5, 3 hours to clean floors. He was doing it to make extra money. I was doing it because Dad made me. I'd spend those days with him. Started when I was 8. And as an 8-year-old, I was not a very good worker. And I would have my hose, because we'd have to hose down the floors, and I would be spraying stuff all over the place, and he'd get on to me like, hey, focus on work, and I'd do the best I could on scrubbing up the oil and sweeping up the mess. But inevitably, week after week, day after day, working with my dad, he would come through after he'd finished all his parts. He'd been at that place 14 hours, 15 hours. He'd come through, he'd look at my parts and the areas that I had cleaned, and he would, without saying a word, go pick up a broom, go grab the hose, whatever he needed to do, and he would start cleaning up whatever I didn't do right. And I would get so frustrated with my dad. I remember they had these chairs against the wall where the mechanics would sit sometimes, and so I'd go sit and wait for my dad to go redo the work that I just spent 2 hours doing. And I was so grumpy because I just wanted to go home. I was hungry. I wanted to eat dinner. What is my dad doing? I just watch him scrub. Finally, when it was done to his satisfaction, he'd pack me into the car, never say a word, take me home, feed me dinner. Day was over. That happened year after year after year. As I got older, I realized what my dad was doing. He was quietly and very patiently showing me how to work. My dad had told whoever it was that was in charge of that he would make sure the shop was clean. And my dad was not going to leave until that shop was clean. He was not going to leave it halfway done. And over the course of time, I learned how to work. I learned how to do my job better. It got to where my dad didn't have to come through and clean up after me anymore. I got to go help my dad finish his part because I got faster and faster as I got older. And I tell you all this does have a point. My dad told me how to do the job. And then my dad showed me how to do the job. And he showed me week after week after week. when he'd worked 15 hours, he wanted to go home, probably worse than I did. I watched my dad scrub those floors. And I learned that's how a man works. That's what needs to be done. I learned by watching him. My friends, I wonder how many people are watching you in your faith. Day after day after day. I wonder how many people who you've shared Jesus with are watching you. Maybe they thought you were a fool at first. Maybe they didn't understand. I thought my dad was crazy. I just wanted to go home so bad. Like, Dad, please, I just want to leave. He wasn't crazy. He had integrity. My friends, you have faith. Tell people about it. Just know they might think you're a fool at first, but then they're going to be watching you. What do they see day in and day out? Do they see the love of Jesus? Do they see how to follow the Lord? Do they see how to put faith in action? Do they see that you care for people? Do they see what church is all about? What do they see in you? That's what they're going to be interested in. So our challenge this morning, one, is to be excited about what the kingdom of heaven is doing in this world. Two, is to see how the kingdom of heaven works in our own lives, permeates every aspect of our lives. But three, is to see how God uses you to spread the kingdom of heaven now. My friend, people are watching you. Share your faith. Show them your faith. Live out your faith. And be a part of spreading this thing across the world. You guys with me today? I want to just take a little bit of time and I want us to pray. I don't know where you find yourself in your relationship with Jesus this morning, but I want us to make this personal because it is so personal. And today's a day for us to just say, Lord, you've been working on me. I know you're working on this part of my life, and Jesus, today I want to just give that to you. Maybe that's where you are. Maybe you're totally on the outside and you say, I want to get into this kingdom thing. I want to be a part of what the Lord is doing around the world. I want to receive Jesus. Maybe that's you this morning. You need to take that step of faith and commit yourself to following him. Or maybe it's simply just today's a reminder that your friends and family are watching your faith, and you just want to recommit yourself to be fully in to following Jesus every day. Wherever you find yourself, will you bow your heads? Will you close your eyes? And let's go to